Hi everyone, this is Lauren, your sewing buddy, and today I'm making a very special project for my Jody. Um, they sent me two different garments and said, hey, can you combine these into one thing? So this fabric is going to be for like a cincher, and then this is going to be the main dress, sleeves, and hood here. Um, and then this here is going to be the lining, and that's also the mock-up, because hopefully I can use it for both. So I know I don't have a lot of this, but luckily I think the only thing that needs to be lined is the bodice and maybe the hood. So we shall see how that goes. Get that paperwork out of the way. Alright, and in this book I also kind of sketched out the basic shapes that I'll need and got measurements and figured out what dimensions I need for each piece. So now it's just a matter of marking those and cutting them out. And I'm going to be starting with the front bodice piece because that's kind of the most complicated with the sweetheart neckline, trying to figure out exactly how to make that work in such a way that after it's lined and everything it'll still show through. So it's kind of exciting because I feel like this is the first really more androgynous fashion piece I've made for Jody. I mean, I've made them a skirt, which I guess also qualifies, but I think this is a fun adventure and it's gonna look really cool when it's all done. Oh, and the main body fabric for this one, Jody picked out several years ago at a local fabric shop, Fabrics R Us. They think it was like $8 to $10 a yard, but it's actually like worsted wool super 120S, which I guess is pretty good because I did a search online that's like $45 a yard, so good finds there. But now they've got this whole piece traced out and clean off some lint. I'm gonna see how many pieces across here I can get traced or drawn out. Again, I'm still using that fabric marker from Daiso, which has worked really well so far, but I feel like it is starting to dry out, so I may be due for a replacement. But I just found out that they've got online ordering now, so maybe I can make that happen. For the pieces on this, I'm essentially working my way around the torso. Their chest measurement and waist measurement are actually the same right now, so that's a little bit of an interesting challenge to make it look a little bit less cylindrical. But I feel like with the cincher and everything, that'll work out pretty good. I don't intend the cincher to actually like tuck anything in, it's just there mostly to look cool. And then for the hood, I'm kind of feeling like I just attach it at the shoulders to leave sort of a keyhole back. That'd be pretty cool, but again, we'll see what happens, because with this sort of thing, a lot of the designing happens as I go, because maybe it doesn't work out the way that I intended, but that's okay. It's part of what art is, I guess. For the bodice on this, I'm doing, there's the front piece, two side pieces, and then two back pieces, or one back piece on each side. So it's all the way around 7 pieces together. And with the cylindrical measurements, it's not that important to have the 2 pieces on each side, but it does make adjustments and alterations a lot easier to have that. And then I am going to do a zipper back, which is another reason why the keyhole back makes it easier, because then I don't have to figure out how to make that work with the hood. The hood is sort of a separate piece to that. And you may notice the back piece that I'm drawing out right now has a very sharp angle on the side. That is to kind of help not only account for the body shape itself, but to give that sort of illusion of shape on a cylindrical form, which is always what we're looking for, even in women's fashion, I think. But that's all of them. I just need to find the cap to this, finally. Let's get these cut out, and you can see what I've actually been drawing, since it doesn't really show up well on video. And while I'm getting this cut out, I'd like to invite you to check out the description of the video for links to my Ko-fi, Patreon, and social media accounts. I'm not super active with the social media. I'm working on that, but I would appreciate any support that you're able to give, because that helps me keep doing this rather than looking for, I guess what you would call a day job, since I would prefer not to expose myself to COVID. I also have a baby on the way, so, you know, getting a little bit of income from doing something I enjoy and can do in a few hours a day is much preferable. And what I'm doing here is tracing out that side piece once again, because I determined they're essentially the same. I just need to mirror them. I didn't actually need to cut it mirrored because the fabric is already folded over on itself properly, but you know, past Lauren felt like that was important, so that's what she did. But now I just need to cut out the back panel and that last side panel, and you'll be able to see that very sharp angle, which I realized I did not take the second side panel into account when I measured out how wide the back is, so that does need to be adjusted, but that's why we do mock-ups and try-ons and figure these things out. And because I can essentially base these together, pin them, and use the pins to make seam adjustments, I shouldn't need to make a second mock-up. Just need to get this one to fit properly. So with all of that done, now I just need to do the shoulder straps to make sure those are going to sit properly and give enough space. So those are 4 pieces that are essentially all the same. So I'm doing a second fold over here, double checking the measurements in my book. And for the shape on these, I want it to be wider at the shoulder and then sort of narrow down as it comes down towards the bodice. So that's why I'm doing sort of a trapezoidal shape, I guess. It's a very elongated trapezoid, not quite a triangle. The width on this, I need to take seam allowance into account, or I guess not really, because I think I'm gonna do a bias tape around this one. We'll find out. But I've only got that one inner edge tapered. The outer edge is straight because I still need to attach a sleeve to that, which would have been easier if I had sort of rounded it out, but it's fixable. I can work with this. We'll make it happen. Just need to make sure I cut that folded edge off and get everything cleaned up, and those are all of my pieces cut. So then I've got my bodice front, which is gonna have to be darted. That first side gets connected here. I just need a few pins. Luckily it's mostly a straight line, so I don't need to worry about pinning curves or anything, because a masculine presenting body is much easier to tailor for, it turns out, than a feminine presenting body. My lines didn't quite match up, but in the end I got there. So then the other side piece is going on that, the back piece goes on like so, and is a little bit longer than it needs to be. So let me mark where I need to cut that. And then again, I'm doing the zipper back, which is why we have the 2 back pieces. But I'm going to stack those on top of each other once again so I can trim that nicely. Because that's one thing I've learned with mock-ups is you still want to mirror your pieces unless you're dealing with a very asymmetrical body like scoliosis or something. But now I've got this all basted together. I've tried it on Jody. I just need to mark my seam lines, which, as we knew, I do need to take in quite a bit because of that extra bit that I left in on accident. So I am changing the shape of this side panel a little bit, but I'm also going to bring the bodice line down on the side so it will match up in the end. And then just a little divot here at the side back because turns out that's going to give a cute little fit there. And then it's just a matter of taking those pins out and ripping everything apart. And again, I'm only marking one side of this because I am going to mirror the pieces. So I've still got my center crease on the front piece and then everything else is symmetrical. So I'll just need to stack them back on top of each other and cut out to the new guidelines. So I've got the front panel separated, folded on that remaining crease line. I'm just gonna trim, realizing that I am not leaving seam allowance there, but that's okay, I can adjust it later. And then I did reshape that front a little bit, again, because that side piece isn't exactly as tall as it once was. And then I'm separating the next piece. I left them all connected just so that I could keep everything sort of organized. And yes, I am missing my seam ripper. As we all know, that's like the #1 thing to go missing in your sewing room. So I'm sure it will turn up someday, but until then, I just get to do a rip and pull. Now I've got both of my front side pieces separated. There wasn't a lot of adjustment on these, but you can see, oh, right, this was the one with a lot of adjustment, so I'm just gonna cut right along that line. Once again, forgetting seam allowance, but I promise it all turns out okay. This is why we do second try-ons. But now that those are all tidied up, we can move on to the backside piece, which just, again, has that one little divot marked out. And since it is just that one little divot, I'm actually going to trim that before I separate the pieces. Just that way I can make sure it's the same on the back piece as on the side back piece, and then once again rip those threads out. I did use sort of a burgundy thread on this because it's much easier to remove threading when it doesn't match the fabric. And also, why waste your nice gray thread when you have other colors that you don't use as often that you know it's going to be ripped out. Though before I got too far into the ripping, I had the realization that since I've already got that cut and both of these pieces are the same, I can just stack the whole thing and then cut it out of the other side as well, and then do a little bit of a cleanup to even out that curve, because you don't want sharp corners along your curve there. So that actually was easy peasy. I do still need to separate them though, just because I need to keep things fairly even through the entire piece, and also because the shoulders are not going to sit where I had them. I need to move the back shoulder a little bit more toward the center just to keep the shoulders from falling off. But now I have all these nice pieces that I can sew back together and try again. And it's a new day. I had my thumb brace show up last night because my thumb tendons do not like how much I've been sewing lately. Weird thing with pregnancy that the everything loosens up. So in another try-on, I figured out I need to put some darts in here. So what I've done is just darted those, and I'm gonna mark it before I pull the threads. That way I can transfer those markings easily onto the fashion fabric when I cut that out. But once I added those darts, everything fits just fine, even with forgetting some seam allowance. So I'm very happy with the mock-up and hope that it holds true through to the actual design. I did need to make a little bit more adjustment on this back side seam because it was gaping a little bit up at the arm. So it turns out I needed to really flatten that curve that I made there. And then with that done, the shoulder seam was next. I need to put a little bit more angle on that. Common problem that I have, I always assume, especially on masculine presenting form, that the shoulders will be a little bit broader, but Jody does have very nice delicate shoulders sometimes, so I did have to trim that a little bit down. But hey, look, I remembered to leave a seam allowance, so good job, Lauren. I think those were the only real adjustments there. Yeah, everything else is good, so I'm ready to cut the mirror pieces and then take it apart. And then here I have all of my pieces stacked on top of each other, ready to be trimmed down as needed. So there's just a little bit on the side seam here that needed to be trimmed, and that's okay because these pieces are starting to fray just a little bit, not enough that it's going to affect sizing too much, but enough that I would rather clean it up a little bit now while I can. And once again, just need to flatten out that curve on the side back seam, and then make a sharper slope for the shoulders. And then I just need to double check the front bodice piece, which it's folded crooked, but it matches out, so we're good. Now we are finally ready to start cutting into the fashion fabric, that worsted wool. I have measured out what length I need for the bodice pieces, basically laid them out and then cut off that amount so that it would be easy to manage in the space that I have. And then just need to pin that into the floor as usual. This whole thing is much more of an adventure with a thumb brace on, let me tell you. But, you know, we've got to take care of our bodies. So, let's see, I think what's going to show up well here? This one will work. So I'm just going to rough trace that out, make sure it's showing up, which surprisingly the wool takes the colored pencil very well. And this is on the right side of the fabric, but you know what, it's gonna be all within the seam allowances, so that's okay. Except for this dart that I'm marking here, but I just need to mark the top points and then unpin so I can mark that bottom point, and it's all good. Okay. And then get the rest of these pins out so I can cut this. And hey, you can almost see those markings on video, so that's something. And it turns out cutting with a thumb brace is also not ideal. It's a part of my body I do need to take care of because, you know, I don't want repeated stress injury. I should actually be resting it and not sewing, but how are you gonna tell me not to sew? Like, I can't not. But I got that center dart point marked on the other side as well now, and then just marking it at the tops there, and there is my bodice front piece. So I'm gonna leave those stacked so that everything stays nice and organized, And then we're moving on to, what do we have here? The shoulder pieces. So again, I need 4 of these. And they are the same. However, I am just gonna use the one piece as a template for right now, because copy of a copy and all of that. Again, pinning directly into the carpet because I feel like that holds it very stable, and I know I'm not doing serious damage to the carpet that's gonna affect security deposit or anything. But I am going to actually take the pins out first and then cut. Try to get that angle on there. Just happy that I can actually find my black shears for this, because they do make things much smoother. Except for that little catch you saw right there. Just need to trim off that side, and there's my shoulder. Well, one shoulder. Which I guess I will use another one for the other shoulder piece. Once again, I didn't really need to worry about mirroring that piece, but for some reason I can't get it into my head that if they're all the same, then I don't need to mirror because the fabric is already mirrored on itself. That's, you know, go do you, Lauren. And I am having to press fairly hard to make sure that I get a good visible line with the colored pencil, especially since I have carpet as my backing, but it's showing up well enough that I can do what I need to do. So once again, get that unpinned and get this cut out. I am, like, I'm in love with this fabric also, by the way. It's just that little bit of a stripe on it and the way that it drapes, it's lovely. I would love to have more of this, and I think I should probably hunt that down at some point and see if I can make that happen. Now I'm moving on to my side seams, get some stray threads off of there. And one nice thing is I can definitely tell the difference between the side front and the side back now, because the side front is much more narrow. So that at least is helpful. I guess if they were both still the same, it wouldn't matter, but it helps my brain, so there you have it. Just getting that traced out again. And you can see that the edges there are a little bit offset from one another. That is my bad for not double checking as I go. But then once I get this unpinned, I can get that cut out. And, you know, do as I say, not as I do when you have any kind of an injury. I should definitely just be resting my thumb right here, but instead I'm figuring that since I have the brace on, I can totally just, you know, go ahead with any projects that I like. Like, I still have my Regency stays that I'm working on, which I'm sewing one eyelid a day just to make sure that I don't overdo it. But then I do things like this. But there is our side front. Both pieces there set aside, and then grab some more stray threads because those are everywhere. And then there's our side back piece with that little divot in the side to make almost a waistline. Just get that pinned in once again. And if you have any questions or advice about dressing non-binary, I'm probably not the person to go to, but there are a lot of great videos out on YouTube just about, you know, dealing with non-binary life and how to cope with that. But yeah, you can definitely tell the difference in shape. If you were to look at any woman's pattern, it would be a lot curvier, a lot more complicated, but this one is probably the easiest dress that I have made, other than the fact that my wrist is not cooperating because of that brace. And I tried to cut it out with the piece on there this time, and that didn't work out so well, so I've marked out just that last little bit so I can cut it at a correct angle. But there's both of those. And then I should just need to do the back piece. So I'm gonna do that closer to the selvage edge. Line up that nice zipper line. And pin that in once again. And realize that my hair has gotten so long lately. I think I have brushed this, but I had it braided yesterday, which is why it's a little bit wavier than normal. Normally I do have very straight hair that just kind of sits. Again, I'm trying to cut out with the fabric so I don't have to trace it out. I can just follow the line of the lining fabric. Mostly that works out. And you can see the top edge there wasn't quite even. That's because I did a snip and rip for the length, which on this fabric doesn't work out quite as well. And then I determined that I was not going to be able to get that back edge with the angle that I had there. So once again, trace that out and then cut, which nicely, it's a striped fabric, so once again I can just follow the line. And that, I believe, is everything. So now I can get the scraps out of the way and we'll be ready to start sewing for real. And these are going to be flat-lined, so what I need to do first is stack all the pieces with their counterparts, figure out which side I want to be the right side. There's not a whole lot of difference on these, but there is some. Like, the lining definitely has a shinier side, which I would like to have on the, I guess the inside, so that would be the right side of the lining. And then this one, there's a slightly, there's a side where the stripes show up a little bit better than on the other side. I'm pinning that corner first, and then one in the center to hold everything still, and then going to each corner to line everything up. And then I'm going to need to do a basting stitch around the edges just to make sure that these pieces do behave as one solid piece. And once that's done, I can start the assembly. And here we have everything nicely flatlined. Well, it is a little bit ripply, but that just needs a little bit of pressing, which we will get to eventually. But for now, I'm going to start with the back piece and then attach the side back piece. Make sure I've got the correct one, which is the one that fits properly. So here I am just laying out essentially what these are going to look like. Do a quick pin here just to get everything attached. Again, this is a mostly straight line to a mostly straight line, but we did add that little bit of curve, so there is a slight difference there, but something has gone horribly wrong. the bottom edges weren't matching up, and that's what I would most like to have matched up at this point with these. Like the armhole, if I need to add a little bit more there, that's not the end of the world. But if the waistline winds up too high, that's a problem, because then I'll have to add a waistband or something, and I'm not positive that I have material for that. But anyway, just need to get those stitched together and then folded out. And now I've got that done for the entire torso minus the shoulders. And I've realized that what I need to do is put bias tape along that top edge, since I'm flatlining and not baglining this. So my options for that are more of the lining fabric, or this material I'm using for the cincher, or just do more of the same fabric. But it's been decided that the lining fabric is going to be the best option, just for aesthetic reasons. So here is a re-lesson on how I do my bias tape so that there's no waste. Luckily, I've got this nice bit of rectangle right here that I can use. It should be just big enough. So what I'm going to do is measure about how big of a square I can make on this, and then make sure that I get the same top and bottom, mark out where that is. That way I can straighten out that edge. And then here I can sort of trace along from where that straight cut was before, if I use my ruler. Because it is very important for this that you get as close to a perfect square as you can. That's going to just make everything a lot easier. So what I've done is trued up the edge of my ruler to the edge of the fabric there, and then I'm just working my way across, making that as straight a line as possible. So that's going to be where I start the square from on the bottom, and then measuring up from there. Turns out that edge wasn't actually totally straight. So I'm just gonna trace that line there to make sure that I do wind up with a straight line. Either that or the bottom edge of my ruler isn't straight. Who knows? So then I just need to measure that to make sure it's the same bottom and top. And yeah, that's pretty good. And then measure the height for what I need, and realize that this is actually a lot easier if I just go with an even number, because then I won't have, well, ideally I won't have any to cut off at the edge. And you'll notice I am not wearing my thumb brace for this because I am a naughty sewist. So let's measure off for an even number. I think it wound up to be 16 inches or somewhere around there. If you would like to zoom in and double check that, you may. It doesn't really have an effect in the long run. It's just a matter of how big a square you have available to cut. And then once I have the height marked, I measure the width out again from there, because I want to make sure that I haven't veered off in any direction. And then I just need to get this cut, which is so much easier without a brace on. But again, if you have an injury, take care of your injury. Don't try to push through and sew things that you probably don't need to be sewing right now. Like, give yourself at least a couple of days rest. But I did realize I need to double check the height there, because I may have veered a little bit north in that measurement as well. And then just folding up so that that dot meets the dot across from it. And I am doing a double layer here. That is wholly unnecessary, but at least then I've got a second nice square in case I don't wind up with enough bias tape. But then I'm just following that line up from our bottom dot, and then cutting along the edge of the fabric using that as a guide. This is not the most precise way to do this, not highly recommended, but it works for me. Just, you really have to make sure everything is lined up and stays lined up. Otherwise, you'll wind up with pieces that don't match up right. Your lines of bias tape will be a little bit crooked, which can make things difficult when you're trying to actually edge something. But then I'm just cutting inside of the fold here to use that as a nice crisp edge. Trying very hard to stay right along that fold, because if I veer off one way or the other, then it's no longer a good square. But there we go. And then toss all of that aside because I only need the one square once again. Fold that into a triangle. Press it down as good as you can. Try to get all the corners matched up nicely. And then slice down along that fold once again. And again, I want to keep this line as straight as possible. This one is more difficult because it's not along a crease, but it works out well enough. And then you take that and kind of make a diamond out of the fabric, but I also want to make sure that I have right sides together. So you should have a tail hanging down on either side, kind of looks like a tooth. And then I sew straight along that edge. And then what I need to do, I mean, ideally you're going to press that seam, but I am not in a pressing mood today. As you can see, I've got my brace back on as well, so that kind of tells you how this day's been going. I'm just going to mark out 2-inch columns here. Once again, this used to be an 18-inch ruler, and it was wonderful, and then it got knelt on and split in half. So, not the ideal situation, but it still works. It's fine. I'll get a new one eventually. I want to make sure that the columns here are as straight as they possibly can be, so I'm matching it up with that edge that I cut. Just as good as possible. And I love these rulers because you can do a 1, 2, or 3-inch width and see all the way through to make sure that everything is on track. I'm drawing up to that seam line, and then I need to hold that seam open while I get the next line drawn. And this would have been much easier if I had just pressed that seam open, but again, that's not me today. I'm just gonna deal with it as I can. So I'm working down from the top this time because that's where I was already. Lining up that 2-inch mark with the line I just drew, and then drawing along the edge here, and going all the way down, which luckily I don't need a ton of bias tape for this project, but I should definitely be able to get enough out of this. And as it turns out, I wound up with a little bit of excess on the end anyway, because I forgot about our dear friend Pythagoras, as one of my calculus instructors once said. But that's okay, I just need to trim that off and everything will work out perfectly. You do definitely want to trim any excess off at this stage rather than the next one, because it just helps keep everything a lot less confusing. So then once you have that trimmed, what you're going to do is measure out your seam allowance along the tops of all of your columns. So I'm doing a 1/2 inch allowance here. This just makes it easier to match up your columns when you're creating your tube, as it were. Because you want to do that both at the top and the bottom. And then you're going to fold this up. You want to offset your columns, so like the first column isn't attached to anything, and then the second column is attached, the top of the second column is attached to the bottom of the first column. And I think I've got most of this off screen for some reason, but I will show you what it looks like, I hope. Oh, here we go. Okay. So what I'm doing is pinning right along that seam line, so I make sure that where the line on one side crosses the seam allowance is the same as on the other side, so that it kind of makes an X. That way it'll make cutting a lot easier once we get to that point. But yeah, just pin each line through. Maybe a couple more pins right on the seam there to make sure it stays open, and then you've got this nice little tube. And now that I've got that sewn, I've turned it inside out because this time I'm going to use the rotary cutter. It's with my thumb being how it is, it's just going to be easier all around. Always make sure you cover your rotary cutter when it's not in use, but by folding it inside out, I've got those lines on the inside, so I can just follow those nice and easily all the way around. And yes, I could do this from the top, however then you run into the risk of slicing through the bottom side of the fabric. This way I don't have that risk, because there's only one layer I'm dealing with. I just have to make sure that top layer of fabric is entirely out of the way. And yeah, just keep going until you reach the end. And once you do reach the end, you've got all that nice clean bias tape to work with. The first thing you do is close your rotary cutter, because safety first. And then we're going to pin that right sides together along the top edge of the bodice. And you can see all of those nicely tucked under top stitched seams, because I obviously am not sewing a lot by hand right now. But I'm only going to pin up until the sweetheart point, because that does need to be handled with a lot of care to maintain that point. But while I do get that pinned, I would like to thank you for joining me here today. We're going to end the video here. I'll be here next week, where we'll take a look at the sleeves and see how far we get from there. This is an ongoing project, and because this is a gift for my Jody, I am contributing it as part of the Home for the Holidays collaboration with CauseTube. So there are a lot of us making either gifts or holiday themed costumes. There's at least one really gorgeous St. Lucia out there, which you should definitely track down. Yeah, look for hashtag Home for the Holidays. And in the meantime, I would love if you could like, comment, subscribe, share, do all of the YouTube things. And I hope that you go and create beautiful things this week.